since we have some faces around here, and I don't know what it is, but it's time, we'll do some introductions, but I'm always going to start with Chiquita.
Chiquita Taylor, City Secretary.
Greg Contreras, Mayor.
I'm Todd Pruitt. I'm a partner at Patillo, Brown and Hill.
Kevin Hugman, Interim Assistant City Manager for Operations.
Tia Pettis, Assistant Director of Fiscal Services.
Richard Jackson, Director of Fiscal Services.
James Talley, Servant.
Karen Sherry Brown, City Council Member, District 4.
That's right. And I'm Don McBurnett, District 2 City Council Member and Chair of the Audit Committee. Our other person, Jerry Frazier, is not here. He had been in the hospital, but I don't know. I tried to contact him if he'd be here, but hadn't heard anything back. Anyway, it's receive public comments is authorized by Section 501.071 of the Texas Government Code. This meeting shall be convened in closed executive session for the purpose of seeking confidential legal advice for the city attorney on any item on the agenda at any time during the meeting. Pursuant to Texas Code 551.127, one or more members of the governing body may appear via video conference call. Presiding officer and quorum of the city council must be physically present at the above stated location. The city of Duncanville reserves the right to reconvene recess or align the regular session or called executive session order of business at any time prior to adjournment of the direction agreement of mayor. This is an open meeting conducted in person and virtually. To submit a comment via email, the following information is required. Send a comment by 12 p.m. on Tuesday, October 29th. Email the city secretary at DuncanvilleText.com. Email public comment audit committee Tuesday, October 29th. First, last name, and the address. And city secretary, do we have any public comments or? Oh, there he is. There's Jerry Frazier.
Oh.
Okay, welcome, Jerry.
Y'all starting on time?
Yes, sir. and if you will,
This is the Lions Club.
if you will introduce yourself, everybody.
Everybody did that? I'm Jerry Frazier. I'm a CPA here in Duncanville. I'm about ready to quit because I'm getting gray hairs.
Okay, and city secretary, do we have any public comments?
No public comments.
Okay, and anybody, Ms. Avery, do you have a public comment?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so next item is discussion. A, consider the minutes of the July 9th, 2024 Audit Committee meeting. And did you provide that?
I provided it for all with the, when I emailed you.
Okay, very good.
Chairman, I move we approve minutes.
Okay. We've got a motion. Do we have a second?
I second.
We've got a second. Any discussion? Okay. All in favor of approving the minutes? Say, well, you want to do a
Just
vote? Yeah, just raise your hand, please. Okay. All those opposed? All right, motion passes. And note, Mr. Frazier abstained, right, because you weren't here, right? Yeah. Okay. Item number B, review and discuss the audit of the financial statements for the year ending September 30th, 2023 with the auditor from Patillo, Brown and Hill LLP. And Mr. Todd Pruitt, we're so glad you're here. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. I guess first of all, I'd like to thank Richard and Tia and all the city staff for all of the help that they gave us during the course of the audit. This, I hadn't worked with the city in probably 5 or 6 years, and this was not not the normal audit that I was used to undergoing in the past. And I know neither one of them, I don't think, was even here at all during fiscal year 23. And
Right.
I know the 22 audit wasn't completed until I think March of 24. And I think they kind of stepped into a real challenge when they walked in there, and they really did a good job of getting us what we needed in order to complete our audit and get this thing completed and get y'all back on schedule. The way that the audit process kind of worked, if there were things that weren't done yet, they cleaned everything up and before they gave it to us by the time we got it. everything was generally clean. We didn't have any, as we'll see when we go through these documents, we didn't have any material audit adjustments that came out. Now obviously your report's late. You're not going to get it out on time when you don't finish the previous one until March or April or whenever it was. But it was, by the time the records were given to us, everything was in really good shape, and we appreciate their efforts there. Should have, everyone should have 3 documents. You've got the big one, which is the city's draft annual comprehensive financial report. And it says draft, but it's in the format that we believe could be final. As soon as the audit committee is ready to approve it, we could sign it and send it on out. You also have a thinner bound document, which is the single audit report. You might remember that any local government in the country that spends over $750,000 of federal grants in a year has to undergo the single audit. And the single audit, what you're doing is in addition to your financial statement audit that you always have, you're adding a compliance audit of your federal grant awards. And in recent years, with all the COVID money flying around, pretty much all of the cities that I work on are reaching the single audit threshold. And then lastly, you've got a staple document, and this contains all of the communications that are required to be made from the independent auditor to an audit committee anytime you undergo the audit process. So what I'd like to do today is just go over the results of our audit, which are contained in several different reports. And then if anybody has any questions at the end or even in the middle, I'd be happy to address any questions you might have. I guess a good place to start would be the independent auditor's report in your annual comprehensive financial report. If you're looking at that report, the first section is the introductory section. You'll notice it's numbered with Roman numerals. If you skip past that section, that's an unaudited section, so we won't spend any time on it. The first page of the financial section.
Kyle, you read that and over the introduction section, is that correct?
I'm sorry?
You've already read over it, at least there's no.
Yes, we read over
areas in it.
We read over the entire document. If you're looking at the table of contents, the introductory section and the statistical section, which starts on page 83, those sections are both unaudited, so we're not opining on them, we're not expressing an opinion on them, but we go through every page in the document, make sure that it agrees to where it's supposed to agree, that it contains the information that's required to be in that section. So every page in here has been looked at. The opinion that we express is only on the financial section. And if you look at the independent auditor's report on page 1 of the financial section, what this report basically says is that preparation of these financial statements is the responsibility of the city. We can assist with the preparation of the financial statements, and we do, as long as certain safeguards are put in place, and they were, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But ultimately, the preparation of the financial statements is the responsibility of the city. It's our responsibility as your auditor to express an opinion on the financial statements. You'll see our opinion there in the second paragraph. Happy to report we've issued what's called an unqualified opinion. You'll often hear people call it a clean opinion, and it's the highest form of opinion that you can receive. What it really means to you as a user of these financial statements is that the financial statements that you have here in the financial section, they have been audited by our firm, and in our opinion, they're free of any material misstatements, and they're also presented fairly in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. Again, we're not giving assurance that they're correct to the dollar. There's a materiality threshold that's used, but in our opinion, they're free of any material misstatements. You will also note in the very last paragraph on page 3 that our audit was performed in accordance with government auditing standards. Those standards require your auditor to do a number of things, one of which is to report on your internal controls over financial reporting and compliance with laws, regulations, contracts, and grants. You will find the government auditing standards report on page 1 of the single audit report. And your government auditing standards report separated, as I mentioned, into 2 sections. The first section is the report on internal control over financial reporting. And the second section there is a section on compliance with laws, regulations, and contracts and grants. The first part, the report on internal controls over financial reporting, what this really means is that in order for us to plan and perform our audit, we first have to gain an understanding of all the internal controls that you have in place over the financial reporting process. That's really all the policies and procedures that you have in place in order to prepare these financial statements. And your auditor's doing that not in an effort to identify any deficiencies. They're doing it so that they can plan, so that they can identify risks where you believe material misstatements are more likely to occur. And then you can concentrate your audit focus in those areas where risks would be more likely. However, if during the process of gaining an understanding of internal controls, we do identify any deficiencies that we think are significant, we are required to report them in this report. And you can see there in the very last sentence in that section that there was one finding included this year that was considered to be a material weakness. That is finding 2003-001. And if you want to look at that finding, you will see it on page 9. Basically, there were a number of findings in your prior year's report that you can see on page 10 there. A number of internal control findings that dealt with producing timely financial statements. There were an inordinate number of material audit adjustments that were needed to be made. So the bank reconciliations, I think, had not been done, et cetera, et cetera. This year, for the current year, the only finding that you have that applies to the current year is the timeliness of the issuance. In order to issue financial statements that are really usable to the readers, you really should be issuing them probably, say, by the end of March. And here we are, almost Halloween, so it's just too late. In addition to that,
March of 2024, you say in this
correct.
case.
Yes, and normally, I know when I used to work with the city before, we generally presented, I think, to the audit committee either in February or at the latest March. You have to issue it by the end of March in order to receive the GFOA award. So that's kind of a goal. And in addition to that, we'll talk about this a little bit with the single audit. Anytime you have to undergo the single audit process, that reporting package is due within 9 months of year end, which would have been June 30th. So then that's the second part of the finding that we have here. If you go back to the government auditing standards report, the first section deals with internal controls over financial reporting. The second part of that deals with compliance with contracts, laws, regulations, and grants. You were out of compliance with the single audit reporting requirements in that you didn't complete your audit within 9 months after year end. Theoretically, that could cause problems with receiving your federal funding. I don't expect you would have any issues like that. I mean, certainly for just being this late, I've seen them be a lot later than this in the past. But that being said, that's as a practice, you don't want to make practice out of that. You need to get it done. Ideally, you would complete financial statement audit and single audit by the end of March.
Would it be appropriate to ask the question, in light of this, we know that this is over, but looking at the next year, we think we're going to be pretty much on time?
I don't want to speak for them, but I would assume that you would definitely be able to get back on track for fiscal year 24's audit. Unless there's something I'm not aware of, I think we'll be back on track.
So I do want to add, Mr. Talley, as well, that they have been producing financial statements on a regular and recurring basis and that stuff. So I don't know if you want to say anything more, Mr. Jackson, or not.
Yes, certainly, Mr. Talley and committee. I guess, well, first of all, good afternoon.
Okay.
But to your question, it's definitely on our radar to have this completed by the March 31st deadline. We believe that we're positioned as it relates to what we're currently working on, that this is a realistic target for us to be able to satisfy and also get us back on track, because this is the third year consecutively of the city's audit not being within the 180-day allotment. So again, it's our estimation based on what we're working through right now, that we see this as a target that we can hit, and that we certainly have as a goal to get this accomplished by the end of March of 25 for fiscal year 24's audit.
Well, it's going to also include, has to consider the auditor. They got to get in and do their thing and everything. So how's that looking? That looking pretty good?
Yes, we went ahead and tentatively put it on our schedule for January to do the field work, which is what we used to do previously, just in case that the city wanted to go that route. So we actually already have it on our schedule.
So that done, does that mean that we're going to be meeting to go over the audit plan for the upcoming year, the audit committee?
Yes.
Okay. When is that now scheduled for?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
We're going to have a meeting.
Okay, so to summarize this, the government auditing standards report, there was just the one finding this year, which is the timeliness of the issuance of the audit. Moving forward in the single audit report, one more audit report that we issue in a single audit. Starts on page 3 of your single audit report. This is the report that covers the compliance audit of your federal awards program. And you can turn to page 6 of the single audit report. You'll find a schedule called the Schedule of Expenditures of Federal Awards. And this schedule lists all of the different grants that the city expended funds during fiscal year 23 under federal grant awards. And the way the compliance audit works for your audit of federal grants, your auditor doesn't select every program to test. They perform a risk assessment, and there's a certain process that you go through to determine which programs that you're going to test, and ultimately you have to get a certain percentage of coverage of expenditures. It was very easy in this case because you could see you had the one very large COVID-19 grant, $4.6 million, so that's the program that we selected for testing. What this report basically means is this report only refers to your major federal programs. And a major federal program in this sense is nothing more than a program that we selected for testing. So this report covers our audit over your COVID-19 program. The first part of it, we actually have to issue an opinion as to whether or not we believe that you complied in all material respects with the various requirements of the program. We're testing things like, did you spend the money on allowable costs that you're allowed to spend the money on? There's usually reporting requirements that have to be done. We test to see that those were made timely and accurately. There's up to 13 different compliance requirements that we could possibly have to test for. You can see our opinion there in the second paragraph, and we've issued an unmodified opinion or a clean opinion. Which again, that basically just means that in our opinion, you did comply with the requirements of that program. The second part of that report deals with your internal controls over compliance. And what that really means is that we're looking at all of the policies and procedures that you have set up in order to make sure you're complying with these requirements. If we had identified any deficiencies in those controls over compliance, we would be required to include them in this report. But I'm happy to report that there were no control deficiencies with respect to your internal controls over your federal program. So it's a clean opinion, both on the fact that you complied with the requirements, and we believe that your policies and procedures that you had set up in place, we did not identify any significant deficiencies in those procedures. Again, I'll make one last note of the very last page of this is your summary schedule of prior audit findings. There were a number of audit findings last year that were kind of just lumped into really a very broad comment. But every one of these comments, with the exception of issuing timely financial statements, was corrected through the year. We didn't have any audit adjustments, significant audit adjustments that came about as a result of the audit. So that's the results of the audit. Sure.
Sorry, Keith.
No, that's good.
Your opening statement indicated that, well, we made it through past audit. And on page 10, you have lumped all of the concerns in this one particular comment. Under the condition there, and one of the things that was really a hot thing for me personally was the reconciliation of our cash balances. And so are we to assume now that everything is reconciled, everything is good now?
It was reconciled up through the time of our audit, 9/30/23. I'm not sure if y'all are all the way caught up now or.
What I'm sort of referring to, I know you can't comment outside of.
Oh, yes.
This
Yes, it is now, cash was reconciled all the way up through the end of September. And I understand they were really far behind on the bank reconciliations. But again, I wasn't involved in the prior year's audit. But yes, it was reconciled as of 9/30/23.
Any comment from anybody else? Not that you got to comment, I'm just curious about to know. Because that was a big hot potato before.
I agree. I mean, that's.
And I was concerned.
My experience is usually if you're not reconciling cash, you're not doing anything else. So
That's my concern.
That's a big concern of mine.
Question. Okay. Mr. Contreras.
With Mr. Mayor.
On page 9, under cause, and excuse me if I'm stepping out of the lines here, but I have a question.
Sure.
You don't have to answer it if it's putting you in a bad light. It said the findings due to staff turnover. Now, it appears to me that in a lot of discussions, it was more than just staff turnover. There were some pretty critical mistakes that were made, and that there were also unnecessary delays in taking steps that they should have. So is this just a professional nicety that we summarize it as staff turnover?
It was actually lifted out of the prior year. That's a reference to your prior year finding. And if you note, the prior year finding said, I think the way it was worded was due to staff turnover. But, and I wasn't involved in the previous audit, but yes, my understanding was that there were a lot of errors. It wasn't just turnover, that there were a lot of errors made. I know there were a lot of errors in your audited financial statements for 22 that were issued. I mean, there were, and we'll go over that in a second, but there were some significant errors in your.
Yeah, well, I don't want to drag you back to the past because you weren't part of our past.
Right.
But I want to, for transparency's sake, it didn't appear to me that it was solely, even mostly, staff turnover as much as those errors.
And that was, I guess, again, probably shouldn't speak to that because I wasn't here, but sure. That was my understanding as well, was that there were just a lot of errors being made beforehand. I think Richard T. had probably walked into a big mess when they got here.
I know I've been on this committee now for a long time. I was here when you were here before.
Right.
And my heart is overjoyed to have Tia here. I'm happy to have you guys back. We had been getting super ratings for years. And then we had we had a problem there for a minute to the right, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, and again, I don't want to go
Yeah, right.
backwards on this, but just for transparency, yeah, it seemed like there were lots of conversations about a lot of errors, and I too am so excited to have people back that have caught us up in an amazingly fast time period. So
Yes.
thank you so much for that, and thank you for helping and getting this all together so we can see where we need to go in the future.
I know I was also very happy to see Tia come back, because I remember working with Tia in the past, and I really wasn't sure what I was getting into before she came back, but once she came back, I said, oh, okay.
Tell us, stay
This
put.
may take a while, but this is gonna be good again.
And stay put. Thank you.
Mr. Pruitt, yeah, please continue.
Okay, that's the results of the audit. Again, just to summarize, you've got a clean opinion on your financial statements. We just have the one finding really that relates to the timeliness of the issuance, and all of the other error-related issues that were brought up in the previous audit were corrected. We didn't have any significant audit adjustments that came about as a result of the audit. You also have this stapled document that contains all of the communications that are required to be made from an auditor to the audit committee. Some of these we've already talked about a little bit. The first one is talks about our responsibility and the city's responsibility, and I discussed that when we went over the opinion letter on the financial statements. Plan, scope, and timing of the audit. We completed the audit within the scope. I guess the timing was a little bit late considering what we had originally thought we were doing, but the previous audit wasn't finished until again when we, I guess, had anticipated finishing this audit. So the timing was a little bit pushed back.
However, Mr. Pruitt, I do want to say that we originally were talking about that we were looking at finishing this in December. So the fact that it's being done in October, again, another big thumbs up for the teams, both sides getting this done.
I agree. Independence, probably the most significant benefit that your auditor provides is that they're independent, giving an independent opinion on your financial statements. So we have to meet certain independence requirements, one of which is you have to consider any threats to your independence. And any time that you are assisting with the preparation of the financial statements, that is a threat that you have to consider. But we've met all of the requirements that we need to put in place when we do that. Which really consists primarily of having another partner at the firm do a concurring review of our work papers and financial statements. We do that on every audit where we assist with the preparation of the financial statements, which is basically almost every audit that we do. Significant risks identified there in the middle of page 2. We should probably talk about that because that's new, at least from the last time that I worked with the city. But significant risks are nothing more than risks that are identified at the beginning of an audit by your auditor, which might require special auditing consideration. The new part, significant risks have always been around. The new part is probably 2 or 3 years ago, your auditor had to start listing significant risks in this letter, and that part was new. So some people, I think, were concerned with some of the items, like, for example, the first one, management override of controls. That comment is actually not specific to this city. It's in the standards that every audit you do, you have to consider the possibility that management's overriding controls. So that's going to be a significant risk, should be a significant risk for the city every year, no matter who's doing your audit. That's actually in the standards. And then the other 2, leases and subscriptions, those were just 2 recent standards that were issued by the GASB 87 and 96. And any time that you have a new standard that comes out that's at least somewhat complex, that's probably also going to be a significant risk listed. So that's why those things are in there. Talks a little bit about your significant accounting policies and your estimates. The preparation of financial statements at any city this size are going to have some estimates in there. The big estimates that you have in this report really deal with either capital assets with their estimated useful life and how much of that life has been used up. Your accounts receivable, there's an estimate made as to the amount that's actually going to be collected and the amount that ultimately can't be collected. And then there's also the huge estimates that you have in there for the net pension liability and OPEB liability. And those estimates are actually created by your actuary. So what we're doing with respect to those estimates is that we're testing your inputs that you gave the actuary accurate information so that they can do their job. The problem,
Mr. Burris, go ahead. Will that actuary give an opinion also? How's that work?
They are, I don't know that they're.
What's the information
I would have to
they
look at
receive the
their
information?
report to see if they're opining. I think they issue an estimate, and then that plan is audited by independent auditors, and they opine on the plan. So it is audited.
So now, how do you use it? You just go by what they say, pretty much.
Yes, and then we're getting their estimate from the actuary, and then we test the city's inputs to make sure that the information they're providing the actuary is actually accurate. But we're not actually testing. We're not actuaries, so we can't come up with that liability. We rely on the actuaries for that. But we've looked at all your estimates to make sure that we think they're reasonable, and we agreed that they all were. There were no problems with the estimates. And your financial statement disclosures, we think were adequate and neutral and consistent and clear. We did not really encounter any difficulties during the audit. We were later than we expected to be, but all things considered, I think we had a lot less difficulties during the audit than I was expecting about last December when I had the first meeting with the city. Uncorrected and corrected misstatements. Had we had material audit adjustments, then we would be going over those with y'all, but there were no material audit adjustments that were identified during the audit.
Mr. Pruitt, I have a quick question.
Sure.
Letters always go out, like to council members and such, that ask opinions or statements or anything like that. Did you get a good participation from our?
We didn't have a lot of feedback on the letters, but there were some comments made. But we did not have we didn't have a lot of feedback really on those letters. Okay. Kind of thought I might see more, but you don't always. Sometimes those things, with the way they're worded, those related party confirmations that we send aren't actually required to be sent. We always like to send them just as a standard audit practice. And a lot of times we don't get a lot of great feedback on it. Sometimes we get a lot of kind of wild goose chase items on there as well. But we didn't have a lot of comments, but there were some things to look at that people responded to.
Thank you.
Representations requested from management. Every time you undergo an audit, there's certain representations that you have to sign off on, and we have received that letter. To our knowledge, there were no consultations with other accountants other than ourselves about any matters. And then lastly, I guess on about the middle of page 4, you'll see a list of different GASB statements that have been issued as of now, but are not yet in effect. And there's already 5 statements that have been issued now. The GASB just churns out these statements nonstop. But I think really looking at these, I don't think there's any are really as significant as 87 and 96 were from a workload on your staff. GASB 100, there's not a lot to that one. Compensated absences, I don't think would be difficult to implement either. Really, I don't see any of these that would be anywhere near the amount of work that 87 and 96 were.
And all of these will be incorporated in the next audit, that's correct?
Different years. I think we'll see GASB 100 is next year. 101 is effective for reporting periods beginning after December 15th, 23. So
You said
we
100?
got some
What is-
time on that. Oh, I'm sorry, that's 101, compensated absences. But each one of these will have the, I think the last statement will be when it becomes effective. So I don't think we have any big ones coming up next year.
Of course, you received a letter back from legal counsel regarding any kind of pending.
We did. We got that back last week, and that was incorporated. That's been incorporated. I think it was maybe even Friday of last week. We got that back.
Nothing there to be concerned about.
Right. Nothing that required disclosure or anything like that. There are a couple of items I would like to point out in the financial statements, and then if anybody wants to ask any questions about the audit or the financial statements, I'd be happy to go over those, and then we can go over the financials in as much detail as you would like. But I would like to point out, anytime we have a prior period adjustment, I'd like to point that out. So if you look at pages 15 and 16, you will see this is the statement of activities, which is the operating statement or the income statement in your government-wide financial statements. And you can see in the governmental activities on page 16, the third line from the bottom, that there was a prior period adjustment of approximately $2.5 million from the previous year. We actually increased your net position approximately $2.5 million from what was reported in your prior year's financial statements. And that is actually a net number of some even larger numbers. But in the previous year, your net pension asset, you had a net pension asset instead of a liability at the end of 22. It was misstated in your government-wide financial statements by several $1 million. Your
Misstated, is that what you're saying?
Yes, it was understated by approximately $6 million, maybe. Then your internal balances was overstated by about $3 million. There were also some errors in the, I believe it were the bonds and the OPEB. But there were several errors in last year's report that all netted out to a $2.5 million adjustment to increase your beginning net position in your government-wide financial statements. And like I said, I wasn't involved in the previous year's audit. I know that from speaking with the firm, I spoke to a partner that was in their Chicago office, that there were a lot of different people that worked on their audit from the auditor's standpoint. I think there were maybe a lot of different people even worked on it at the city. I'm not sure if there was a lot of turnover, what went on during that process, but ultimately, I guess it was a very late audit and there were some errors that had to be corrected in it as well. Those have been corrected, and I think moving forward, I think the city's on the right track as far as implementing timely and accurate financial statements back on the schedule that you were used to back when I did the audit before. I'm not sure, was there more than one audit that was late, or maybe
Yes.
two? Or
Yes, this is the third.
third?
Yes. 21, 22, and 23.
But these financial statements, that adjustment just corrects some errors that were made in the previous year. But like I said, I think moving forward, I wouldn't expect to see those in the next year's audit. And that's basically the results of the audit. Again, I mean, overall, I was on the audit committee. I mean, the timeliness is not good, but that's not a surprise. Everybody knew that was going to be late. But I think it is good news that you're on the right path now, and that everything I think is getting cleaned up, and I think you'll be issuing your 24 audit on time again.
Will that get us our Gatsby Award back?
That is what we're shooting for, absolutely.
Won't be for a little bit though.
I think it was over 20 years previously
Yes.
consecutively
Yes.
Wow.
prior to,
How many years did the city not, was there more than just 22?
there was a 1 year that someone dropped the ball in actually sending it. But I think overall, it may have been 30 years total they had participated in the program. And just had that 1 year, so I know it was just consecutively, it was over 20 years.
And 20 more to go, right?
Right?
Restart, start over.
Restart, year one.
But Tia will be here. Tia will be here for that. Make sure it happens.
It's definitely the goal.
So any questions, any discussion?
It was a great summary. I kept it at my level.
And we can talk about this all day long, but I think I bore everybody to tears pretty quick.
I'm very pleased and appreciative again of everyone's hard work.
Mr. Pruitt, would you talk about Patil Brown Hill just a little bit and the history of their company as well?
The history of our firm?
Yes, sir.
Sure, we actually just celebrated last year our 100-year anniversary. So we're in our 100. We were founded in 1923 in Waco, and we now have offices. We have 3 offices in Texas and 1 in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And we're a little bit different in that our largest department. I mean, we're a full-service public accounting firm. We have a tax department and an IT department and a corporate audit department, and all the different departments that you see in your average CPA firm. But we're a little bit different in that our largest department is actually our local government, audits of local governments. That's the biggest area that we have at the firm. And we've got a staff in Waco of, we have 5 partners and about 8 managers and supervisors and probably 40 staff, and that's all we work on is audits of local governments. We do cities, counties, school districts, COGS, just about any type of government.
Not just in Texas, but all over.
Texas and New Mexico.
Okay.
So that's kind of all we do. When I started at the firm,
How long is that?
back in 1994, we had just the Waco office and about 30 employees, I think. Now we've got 4 offices and about 170 employees. It's changed a lot over the years. I'm sure it's a different, and auditing in general has. I mean, everything now is so. When I started, they gave you a pencil and and paper. We didn't even get a computer. It was a different world back then.
Yeah.
And I imagine we'll see a lot of changes in the next 10 years or so with the advancements they're making in technology. I mean, it's getting crazy out there. But
And your history with the city of Duncanville. Tell us a little bit about that.
and I was trying to think, man, I can't remember. This is at least the 3rd, if not the 4th. Is it the 3rd
I
time
know
we've done it 5
3.
years? I know when I first started, the first year I did 5 years with the city, the finance director was Frank Trando.
Yes.
And that was probably in the 90s, I would say. Probably in the 90s. We followed Deloitte, was the city's previous auditor. And then we worked with Richard Summerlin. And I think Richard was there all the way to the end of our last time.
Yes.
So I think maybe I've done 2 different 5-year stints, and this would be the beginning of the 3rd, maybe. They all start to run together often. I have a lot of clients that, because a lot of local governments rotate auditors, which is a best practice really to rotate your auditors every 5 years or so. have a lot of clients that we'll do for 5 years, then we rotate off, and then we come back for 5 years and then rotate off. So it's always interesting to come back to a place after you've been gone for 5 years and see some of the same people will be there and some people have moved on. But I know this is at least the third time that we've started a new engagement, I guess going back into the 90s.
So you have a lot of clients in the Metroplex?
Lots in the Metroplex, probably more in the Metroplex than anywhere else in the state, really. There's just a lot of kind of our target market for cities, or I guess cities, maybe with population, I'd say 30,000 to 200,000. There's just a lot of those in the Metroplex. So they have a lot in there, and they have a lot in Houston, but there's really not nearly as many. They're getting a lot more now in Austin, but even San Antonio, they don't have the same. There's not a bunch of cities around San Antonio that are, 80,000 people, not nearly like you do have in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So we have lots of clients in the DFW area. We do just the ones that I do now. I'm doing North Central Texas Cog. They're in Arlington over there by Six Flags. And I've done, we used to do DeSoto, Grapevine, Bedford. There's just dozens probably that we do. Cities and counties.
And do you find similarly to Duncanville that you rotate back to some of them?
Lots of them we rotate back to. I started in 1994, and I have one client that I've worked on every year since I started, and that's it. Most of the governments rotate auditors, and we generally rotate. We have a lot that I rotate off just for one period, and then we get it back. So I'll do them 5 years, then rotate off 5 years, then get them back for 5 years. We have a lot of those, which is how we end up. And there's not really that many firms in the state that do a lot of these. Maybe 10 or so that do a lot of governments that do as many governments as we do. So that's how we end up knowing a lot of the people at the other firms, because we're always following them or they're following us. So we get familiar with the same firms. Which is why I was surprised that we're looking at the report last year, because that's not indicative of what I usually see from them. I've never seen them that many errors in a report that they issued. So I'm pretty sure it was kind of a non-standard audit process that year. Not to make excuses or anything, but I haven't run into that issue with them ever before.
We're glad to have you back.
I'm glad to be back. This is one I've had. I don't have a lot that I'm doing my third time on. I don't think, maybe just a handful.
Okay, any more questions or discussion?
Yeah, I got a fun one.
Yes, sir.
What is the effect of people working from home had on your work as you do these audits? I'm just curious. It's just
As far as doing our audits, well, there's a lot. It actually benefits us in a lot of ways. In that,
all businesses.
for one, well, just for starters, we wouldn't have enough room in our office for everybody that we have now. If they all came in on the same day, I wouldn't have a place to put them. But for years, our biggest cause of turnover was travel. And because you can only do so many local governments in the Waco area. I mean, you've got to go all over the state. And we went down to Brownsville, to El Paso, to Texarkana. We went all over the state. And so people couldn't do that for very long. They would quit. We had a lot of turnover from it. So when the people started working from home and doing a lot of the audit work remotely, it really cut down on our turnover. I mean, it's just night and day at our firm.
So you do a lot of remote work.
We do a lot of remote work now. We still go out in the field some, but definitely less than before COVID. We have the ability to do it even beforehand, because most people have most of their information electronically now. We probably do more out in the field in the first year, because I think it's easier to really gain an understanding of what they're doing if you're there. That's hard to do to me. I know I'm old, but that's harder to do through a computer, I think. But once you gain that understanding of the controls, it's really, most of the work could be done remotely. And it probably, the finance people probably like it because we're out of their hair. We're not so. I remember when I was a senior auditor, sometimes I would be like either in the office with the finance director or in one office over, and I'd be bombarding them all day long with questions. And it's not as easy to do that anymore. But the staff really like it.
You've been doing this for years, you see, and you couldn't figure out how to save your money, your company, all that money.
I know.
Until people start dying, and then you figure it out.
And you cut down, not only on the travel, cuts down the turnover, but it cuts our costs down quite a bit. I mean, all the mileage and hotels and food and all that stuff adds up.
So now, here's the real
It's been a
question.
huge help to us.
Pretty soon, you're gonna be able to turn this over and sit in a room and say, audit these guys.
And I'll push a button probably and it'll
And
do
it's
it
gonna
for
be
you.
artificial intelligence, you're gonna take care of it.
It's gonna
You
be
won't have
interesting to
you
see
won't have
how
to
that.
reconcile those bank accounts anymore.
And the way we do it now, there's a lot of sampling involved, and I think with the technology going, they'll be testing things 100%. They don't even have to sample; they can just. So it's going to be interesting to see how that unfolds.
Save you some
I
money.
do miss some of the being out in the field more though,
Yeah.
just because I think you get to know your clients better if you're out there in person with them. It's harder to get to know everybody over a Teams meeting, but there's a downside to it. I think that's it. It's harder to really develop the relationships with your clients that you used to in the past.
Well, Mr. Pruitt, we want to thank you for being here and coming in person. So it's time to adjourn this meeting and call this meeting adjourned.
I didn't mean to hold you up there, I'm sorry.
It's all right. All right, meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.